Imagine carrying everything you own on your back, every single day. For most of human history, survival meant walking. Small nomadic bands had to stay constantly on the move, tracking animal herds and foraging for seasonal plants just to secure their next meal. It was an exhausting, relentless way to live. This map illustrates 25 distinct regions scattered across the globe. We call these zones of abundance. In these specific pockets, nature provided such a dense supply of food, whether it was wild grains, concentrated fish, or local game, that humans could finally stop walking. Between 12,000 and 5,000 years ago, scattered groups of people realized they didn't need to chase their food anymore. Long before the invention of writing or formal agriculture, humanity embarked on a massive global house hunt, setting up the very first permanent neighborhoods. The simple decision to drop our packs and stay in one place created a new problem. We couldn't just walk away from harsh weather or depleted resources anymore. We had to stay, and we had to engineer our surroundings to survive. In Japan, an isolated group known as the Jomon dug sunken pit houses into the earth. To process the tough chestnuts and acorns they gathered from the local forests, they shaped clay into flamboyant, cord-marked vessels. They invented the world's first pottery, specifically to boil those nuts into a highly nutritious food. Over in the Middle East, the landscape offered vast fields of wild wheat and barley. To exploit this, the people of the Levant stacked heavy rocks to build the first permanent stone foundations, and they crafted specialized curved blades called sickles to harvest the wild grain efficiently. At the same time, the Sahara Desert was completely green. It was a lush savanna filled with deep lakes, allowing early populations to hunt hippos, catch large fish, and build semi-permanent camps to manage some of the earliest domesticated cattle. Deep in the Iron Gates gorge of the Danube River, the locals had zero interest in farming. They planned and built entire towns with trapezoidal houses facing the riverfront, surviving almost entirely by hunting the massive sturgeon swimming upstream. Across the Korean peninsula, coastal foragers created geometric, comb-patterned pots to store their rich seafood harvests. Meanwhile, high up in the Zagros Mountains, early hill-dwelling communities stacked multi-story mud brick houses, using the roofs of the lower homes as streets to manage their herds of goats. Down in the harsh, dry plains of the Indus Valley, settlers organized massive mud brick villages with built-in granaries. They were the first to cultivate local cotton for textiles, and they even developed a rudimentary form of dentistry, using tiny flint tools to drill human teeth. In North China, the cold, dry plateaus surrounding the Yellow River forced settlers to dig semi-subterranean homes to stay warm, while they farmed a hardy grass called millet. But head further south, and the architectural needs completely flipped. In the lower Yangtze River Valley, the ground was a constantly flooding swamp. To stay dry while harvesting aquatic plants and early rice, they elevated their homes. They used highly advanced wood joinery, fitting pieces together without a single nail, to build the world's first wooden stilt houses. Early humanity did not share a single standard of living. The shape of a home, the tools in the hearth, and the layout of the village were exact physical reflections of the food sitting right outside their front doors. In Mesoamerica, settlers lacked large animals like cows or horses to pull plows. They cleared fields entirely by hand and selectively bred a tiny wild grass into the massive, energy-dense cobs of corn we eat today. Across the Pacific, in the steep mountains of New Guinea, locals carved massive networks of drainage ditches to dry out high-altitude swamps so they could finally plant taro roots. Up in the freezing subarctic climate of Lake Baikal, agriculture was impossible, yet the locals stayed put, hunting freshwater seals and carving intricate white jade jewelry. Contrast that with northern Europe, where coastal dwellers sat on massive natural oyster beds. They had so much food they simply refused to adopt the farming habits of their southern neighbors. When the Green Sahara eventually dried out, desperate populations fled toward the nearest consistent water source. They crammed into the thin strip of green land along the Nile Valley. This extreme population density forced them to quickly organize into sprawling mud brick towns, eventually developing early hieroglyphs just to manage the sheer number of people living side by side. In the cool, thin air of the Ethiopian highlands, the locals carved terraces into the steep mountainsides to catch the heavy rains. They supported themselves on a completely unique set of high-altitude crops, including coffee and teff. Teff is a tiny, high-protein grain that is still used to make their staple flatbread today. In Australia, Aboriginal groups built permanent stone villages alongside elaborate systems of rock channels and dams designed to trap and farm short-finned eels year-round. Meanwhile, in the scorching West African Sahel, communities successfully domesticated pearl millet, a highly resilient grain engineered to thrive in intense heat. Trapped by a freezing lake, perched on a swampy mountain, or squeezed by an expanding desert, environmental pressure consistently forced humans to invent highly advanced engineering solutions to keep their communities alive. Deep in the Amazon basin, the natural soil is highly acidic and poor for farming. To fix this, settlers created terra preta, a man-made, charcoal-rich black earth that stays fertile for centuries. This engineered dirt allowed them to sustain large, connected towns, surrounded by vast orchards of fruit trees. Out on the Eurasian steppe, communities dug hundreds of semi-subterranean pit houses into the earth to block the howling winds. They managed to survive the open grasslands by taming wild horses, keeping them closely managed as a reliable source of meat and milk. Along the arid, desert coastline of central Peru, massive stone pyramids and sunken circular plazas were constructed by people who barely grew food. They relied almost entirely on the ocean, catching millions of anchovies and sardines and farming cotton specifically to weave massive fishing nets. Island communities in Southeast Asia developed a portable agricultural kit of yams and pigs, packing them into outrigger canoes to sail and settle across new ocean territories. In southern India, society revolved around massive herds of cattle, leading to the creation of towering, ritually burned ash mounds that dominated the Deccan Plateau. In North America, communities along the central river valleys built ceremonial mounds while cultivating local weeds like sunflowers and marsh elder. On the Pacific coast, the annual salmon runs were so incredibly abundant that locals could build massive, permanent cedar plank houses, and they carved complex wooden monuments without ever having to plant a single seed. And surrounding Lake Titicaca in the Andes, settlers herded llamas and alpacas at 12,000 feet above sea level. To survive the freezing environment, they invented chuño, a technique of repeatedly freezing and thawing potatoes in the cold night air so they could be safely stored for years. You don't need a golden field of wheat to build a complex society. From freeze-dried potatoes to river sturgeon, and from sunflowers to tiny anchovies, human ingenuity proved capable of building thriving, settled communities out of whatever resources the local landscape offered. Take a look at this map. These 25 hubs represent 25 wildly different approaches to survival. They built homes out of mud bricks, cedar planks, stacked stones, and sunken pits. They ate sturgeon, taro root, acorns, and millet. But despite being separated by impassable oceans, towering mountain ranges, and brutal deserts, every single one of these groups shared the exact same motivation. They all wanted a safe, organized, and predictable place to sleep at night. The walls you sleep inside tonight, the plumbing you use, and the food sitting in your pantry are the direct, unbroken result of a 10,000-year-old experiment. The difficult, incredible choices our ancestors made when they first put down their heavy packs paved the way for the lives we live right now.